Good evening, everyone. Welcome back. The eve of the last day of school. So that is exciting. It's a little bittersweet. We don't get to say goodbye in person, but if you're looking for someone to say goodbye to, you can come to my open office hours tomorrow at 1:30. I'm proud of everybody, that did some work this fourth quarter. And if you weren't able, you know, that's how it is. This is a weird situation, so we're just trying to make it. I'm going to continue reading this book this week until we're finished. So even after the last day of school, uh, you can come check back on here and see me then. So let's get right to it. We're going to start chapter 7 tonight. Chapter 7 is called Every Man Jack. Ooh, good. So it's probably about the man Jack. I want to know more about him. The chapter 6 ended with a little bit of a scare. Bod went to get some revenge on Mo and Nick, and he ended up scaring Nick enough to make him turn into a good person. However, Mo took a little more convincing. Um, Silas helped him out, and now we're here where we're at. All right, every man Jack. Silas had been preoccupied for the previous several months. He had begun to leave the graveyard for days, sometimes weeks at a time. Over Christmas, Miss Lepescu had come out for 3 weeks in his place, and Bot had shared her meals in a little flat in the old town. She had even taken him to a football match, as Silas had promised that she would. She had gone back to the place she called the Old Country after squeezing Bot's cheek and calling him Nimini, which had become her pet name for him. Now Silas was gone, and Miss Lepescu also. Mr. and Mrs. Owens were sitting in Hosea Worthington's tomb talking to Hosea Worthington. None of them was happy. Hosea Worthington said, "You mean to say that he did not tell either of you where he was going, or how the child was to be cared for?" When the Owenses shook their heads, Hosea Worthington said, "Well, where is he?" Neither Owens was able to answer. Master Owens said, "He's never been gone for so long before, and he promised, when the child came to us, promised he would be here, or someone else would be here to help us care for him. He promised." Miss Owens said, "I worried that something must have happened to him." She seemed close to tears, and then her tears turned to anger, and she said, "This is too bad of him. Is there no way to find him, to call him back?" "None that I know," said Hosea Worthington, "but I believe that he's left money in the crypt for food for the boy." "Money," said Miss Owens. "What use is money? Bob will be needing money if he's to go out there to buy food," began Mr. Owens, but Mrs. Owens turned on him. "You're all as bad as each other," she said. She left the Worthington tomb then, and she went looking for her son, whom she found, as she expected to, at the top of the hill, staring out over the town. "Penny for your thoughts?" said Miss Owens. "You don't have a penny," said Bob. He was 14 now, and taller than his mother. "Got two in the coffin," said Miss Owens. "Probably a bit green by now, but I've still got them right enough." "I was thinking about the world," said Bob. "How do we even know that the person who killed my family is still alive? That he's out there?" "Silas says he is," said Miss Owens. "But Silas doesn't tell us anything else." Mrs. Owens said, "He means only the best for you. You know that." "Thanks," said Bob, unimpressed. "So where is he?" Miss Owens made no reply. Bob said, "You saw the man who killed my family, didn't you, on the day you adopted me?" Mrs. Owens nodded. "What was he like?" "Mostly, I had eyes for you. Let me see. He had dark hair, very dark. I was frightened of him. He had a sharp face, hungry and angry, all at once. He was—" Silas saw him off. "Why didn't Silas just kill him?" said Bob fiercely. "He should have just killed him then." Miss Owens touched the back of Bob's hand with her cold fingers. She said, "He's not a monster, Bob. If Silas had killed him back then, I would be safe now. I could go anywhere. Silas knows more than you do about all this, more than any of us do. Silas knows about life and death," said Mrs. Owens. "It's not that easy." Bob said, What was his name? The man who killed him. He didn't say. Not then. Bob put his head on the side, on on one side, and stared at her with eyes as gray as thunderclouds. But you know it, don't you? Mrs. Owens said. There's nothing you can do, Bob. There is. I can learn. I can learn everything I need to know. All I can. I learned about Boole Gates. I learned to dream walk. Miss Lupestu taught me how to watch the stars. Silas taught me silence. I can haunt. I can fade. I know every inch of this graveyard. Miss Owens reached out her hand, touched her son's shoulder. One day, she said, and then she hesitated. One day, she would not be able to touch him. One day, he would leave them. One day, and then she said, Silas told me the man who killed your family was called Jack. Bob said nothing. Then he nodded. Mother, what is it, son? When will Silas come back? The midnight wind was cold, and it came from the north. Mrs. Owens was no longer angry. She feared for her son. She said only, I wish I knew, my darling boy. I wish I knew. Scarlett Amber Perkins was 15, and at that moment, sitting on the upper deck of the elderly bus, she was a mass of angry hate. She hated her parents for splitting up. She hated her mother for moving away from Scotland. She hated her father because he didn't seem to care that she had gone. She hated this town for being so different, nothing like Glasgow, where she had grown up, and she hated it because every now and again she would turn a corner and see something, and the world would all become achingly, horribly familiar. She had lost it with her mother that morning. At least in Glasgow I had friends, Scarlett had said. She wasn't quite shouting. She wasn't quite sobbing. I'll never see them again. All her mother had said in reply was, at least you're somewhere you've been before. I mean, we lived here when you were little. I don't remember, said Scarlett. It's not like I still know anyone. You want me to find my old friends from when I was 5? Is that what you want? And her mother said, well, I'm not stopping you. Scarlett had gone through the whole of the school day angry, and she was angry now. She hated her school, she hated the world, and right now she particularly hated the town bus service. Every day when school was over, the 97 bus to the city center would take her from her school gates all the way to the end of the street where her mother had rented a small flat. She had waited at the bus stop on the gusty April day for almost half an hour, and no 97 buses had appeared. So when she saw a 121 bus with City Center on it as its destination, she had climbed aboard. But where her bus always turned right, this one turned left into the old town, past the municipal gardens, in the old town square, past the statue of Hosea Worthington Bart, and then crept up a winding hill lined with high houses. As Scarlett's heart sank and her anger was replaced with misery, she walked downstairs, edged forward, eyed the sign telling her not to speak to the driver when the vehicle was in motion, and said, Excuse me, I wanted to go to Acacia Avenue. The driver, a large woman, her skin even darker than Scarlett's, said, You should have got the 97 then. But this goes to the city center eventually, but even when you get there, you'll need to get back. The woman sighed. Best thing you can do, get off here, walk back down the hill. There's a bus stop in front of the town hall. From there, you can catch the number 4 or the 58. Both of them will take you most of the way to Acacia Avenue. You could get off by the sports center and walk up from there. You got all that? The 4 or the 58. I'll let you off here. It was a request stop on the side of the hill, just past a large pair of open iron gates. It looked uninviting and dismal. Scarlett stood in the open doorway of the bus until the bus driver said, Go on, hop it. She stepped down onto the pavement, and the bus belched black smoke and roared away. The wind rattled the trees on the other side of the wall. Scarlett began to walk back down the hill. This was why she needed a mobile phone. She thought if she was so much as 5 minutes late, her mother would freak. But she still wouldn't buy Scarlett a phone of her own. Oh well, she would have to endure another shouting match. It wouldn't be the first, and it wouldn't be the last. By now she was level with the open gates. She glanced inside, and that's odd, she said aloud. There's an expression, deja vu. That means that you feel like you've been somewhere before, and you've somehow already dreamed it or experienced it in your mind. Scarlett had experienced it, the knowledge that a teacher was just about to tell them that she'd been to Inverness on holiday, or that someone had dropped a spoon in just that way before. This was different. This wasn't a feeling that she had been here before. This was the real thing. Scarlet walked through the open gates into the graveyard. A magpie flew up as she walked in, a flash of black and white and iridescent green, and settled in the branches of a yew tree watching her. Around that corner, she thought, was a church with a bench in front of it. She turned a corner to see a church, much smaller than the one in her head, a sinister, blocky little Gothic building of gray stone, with a jutting spire. In front of it was a withered wooden bench. She walked over, sat down on the bench, and swung her legs as if she was still a little girl. Hello, said a voice from behind her. Awful cheek of me, I know, but would you help me hold down this, or just really need another pair of hands? It's not too much trouble. Scarlet looked around and saw a man in a fawn-colored raincoat squatting in front of a gravestone. He was holding a large sheet of paper which was blowing out and about in the wind. She hurried over to him. You hold on to it here, said the man. One hand here and one here. That's it. Frightful imposition, I know, ridiculously grateful. He had a biscuit tin next to him, and from the tin he pulled what looked like a crayon, the size of a small candle. He began rubbing it back and forth across the stone with easy, practiced movements. There we go, he said cheerfully. And here she comes. Oops, a wiggly bit down at the bottom here. I think it's meant to be ivy. The Victorians loved putting ivy on things, deeply symbolic, you know. And there we are. You can let go now. He stood up, ran one hand through his gray hair. Ow, needed to stand. Legs got a bit pins and needlesy, he said. So what do you reckon to that? The actual headstone was covered in green and yellow lichen, and so worn and faded as to almost be undecipherable. But the rubbing was clear. Mahela Godspeed, spinster of this parish, 1791 to 1870, lost to all but memory, Scarlet read aloud. And probably now lost even to that, said the man. His hair was thinning, and he smiled hesitantly and blinked at her through small round glasses which made him look a little like a friendly owl. A large raindrop splashed down on the paper, and the man hurriedly rolled it up and grabbed his tin box of crayons. Another handful of raindrops, and Scarlet picked up the portfolio the man pointed to, propped up beside a nearby gravestone, and followed him into the tiny porch of the church, where the rain could not touch them. Thank you so much, said the man. I don't think it's really going to rain much. Weather forecast for this afternoon said mostly sunny. As if in reply, the wind gusted coldly and the rain began to beat down in earnest. I know what you're thinking, the gravestone rubbing man said to Scarlet. You do? She said. She had been thinking, my mum will kill me. You're thinking, is this a church or a funeral chapel? The answer is, as far as I can ascertain, that on this site there was indeed a small church, and the original graveyard would have been its churchyard. That's as long ago as 900 AD, rebuilt and extended several times in there. But there was a fire here in the 1820s, and by that time it was already much too small for the area. People around here were using St. Dunstan's in the village square as their parish church, so when they came to rebuild here, they made it a funeral chapel, keeping many of the original features. Stained glass windows in the far wall are said to be the original. Actually, said Scarlet, I was thinking that my mum is going to kill me. I got the wrong bus and I'm already so late. Good Lord, you poor thing, said the man. Look, I only live just down the road. You wait here. And with that, he thrust his portfolio, his tin of crayons, and his rolled-up sheet of paper into her hands, and he set off at a trot down the gates. His shoulders hunched against the driving rain. A couple of minutes later, Scarlet saw the lights of a car and heard the sound of a car horn. Scarlet ran down to the gates, where she could see the car, an elderly green Mini. The man she had been talking to was sitting in the driver's seat. He wound down his window. Come on, he said. Where exactly am I taking you? Scarlet stood there, the rain running down her neck. I don't take rides from strangers. Quite right, too, he said. But one good turn deserves, and all that. Here, put the stuff in the back before it gets soaked. He pulled open the passenger door, and Scarlett leaned inside and put his grave rubbing equipment down on the back seat as best she could. Tell you what, he said, why don't you phone your mother? You can use my phone and tell her my car's plate number. You can do it from inside the car. You're getting soaked out there. Scarlett hesitated. The rain was beginning to plaster her hair down. It was cold. The man reached over and handed her his mobile phone. Scarlett looked at it. She realized that she was more afraid of calling her mother than she was of getting into the car. And she said, I could call the police too, couldn't I? You certainly can, yes. Or you can walk home. Or you can just call your mother and ask her to come pick you up. Scarlett got into the passenger seat and closed the door. She kept hold of the man's phone. Where do you live? He asked. You really don't have to. I mean, you could take me to the bus stop. I'll take you home. Address? 102A, Acacia Avenue. It's off the main road, a wee bit past the big sports center. You are out of your way, aren't you? Right, let's get you home. He took off the handbrake and swung the car around and drove down the hill. Been living here long? He said. Not really. We moved here just after Christmas. We lived here when I was 5, though. Is that a brogue I detect in your accent? We've been living in Scotland for 10 years. There, I sounded like everyone else, and then I came down here, and now I stick out like a sore thumb. She had wanted it to sound like a joke, but it was true. She could hear it as she said it, not funny, just bitter. The man drove to Acacia Avenue, parked in front of the house, then insisted on coming up to the front door with her. When the door was opened, he said, frightfully sorry. I took the liberty of bringing your daughter back to you. Obviously, you taught her well. Shouldn't accept rides from strangers. But, well, it was raining. She took the wrong bus, wound up on the other side of town. Bit of a mess all around, really. Say, can you find it in your heart to forgive her and, me? Scarlett expected her mother to shout at both of them, and was surprised and relieved when her mother only said, well, you couldn't be too careful these days. And was Mr. A teacher? And would he like a cup of tea? Mr. Said his name was Frost, but she could call him Jay. And Mrs. Perkins smiled and said he could call her Nina. And she brought out the kettle. Over tea, Scarlett told her mother the story of her wrong bus adventure and how she had found herself at the graveyard and how she met Mr. Frost by the little church. Mrs. Perkins dropped her teacup. They were sitting around the table in the kitchen, so the cup didn't fall very far, and it didn't break, just spilled tea. Mrs. Perkins apologized awkwardly and went and got a cloth from the sink to mop it. Then she said, the graveyard on the hill in the old town, that one? I live over that way, said Mr. Frost. Been doing a lot of grave rubbings, and you know it's technically a nature reserve. Miss Perkins said, I know, thin-lipped. I know, thin-lipped. Then she said, thank you so much for giving Scarlett a ride home, Mr. Frost. Each word might have been a nice cue. Then, I think you should leave now. I say, that's a bit much, said Frost amiably. Didn't mean to hurt your feelings. Was it something I said? The rubbings? If it were a local history project. It's not as if I'm, digging up bones or anything. For a heartbeat, Scarlett thought that her mother was going to strike Mr. Frost, who just looked worried. Mrs. Perkins shook her head and said, sorry, family history, not your fault, as if she was making a conscious effort. She said brightly, Scarlett actually used to play in that graveyard when she was little. This is 10 years ago. She had an imaginary friend, too, a little boy called Nobody. A smile twitched at the corner of Mr. Frost's lips. A ghostie? No, I don't think so. He just lived there. She even pointed out the tomb he lived in, so I suppose he was a ghost. Do you remember, love? Scarlett shook her head. I must have been a funny kid, she said. I'm sure that you were nothing of the, said Mr. Frost. You are raising a fine girl here, Nuna. A lovely cup of tea. Always a joy to make new friends. I'll be toddling off now. Got to make myself a little dinner, and I've got meetings at the local history society. You're making your own dinner, said Mrs. Perkins. Yes, making it. Well, defrosting it, really. I'm also a master of the boil in the bag. Eating for one, living on my own. Bit of a crusty old bachelor. Actually, in the papers, that always means gay, doesn't it? Not gay, just never met the right woman. And for a moment he looked rather sad. Mrs. Perkins, who hated to cook, announced that she always cooked too much food every weekend. And as she ushered Mr. Frost out into the hall, Scarlett heard him agree that he would love to come around for dinner on Saturday night. When Mrs. Perkins came back from the front hall, all she said to Scarlett was, "I hope you've done your homework." Scarlett was thinking about the afternoon's events as she lay in bed that night, listening to the sound of the cars grinding their way along the main road. She had been there in that graveyard when she was little. That was why everything seemed so familiar. In her mind, she imagined and she remembered, and somewhere in there she fell asleep. But in sleep, she still walked the paths of the graveyard. It was night. She could see everything as clearly as if it were day. She was on the side of the hill. There was a boy of about her own age standing with his back to her, looking at the lights of the city. Scarlett said, "Boy, what are you doing?" He looked around, seemed to have trouble focusing. "Who said that?" And then, "Oh, I can see you, sort of. Are you dream walking?" "I think I'm dreaming," she agreed. "Not quite what I meant," said the boy. "Hello, I'm Bob." "I'm Scarlett," she said. He looked at her again, as if he were seeing her for the first time. "Of course you are. I knew you looked familiar. You were in the graveyard today with that man, the one with the paper." "Mr. Frost," she said. "He was really nice. He gave me a lift home." Then she said, "Did you see us?" "Yeah, I keep an eye on most things that happen in the graveyard." "What kind of name is Bod?" she asked. "Short for nobody." "Of course," said Scarlett. "That's what this dream is about. You're my imaginary friend from when I was little, all grown up." He nodded. He was taller than she was. He wore gray, although she could not have described his clothes. His hair was too long, and she thought it had been some time since he had received a haircut. He said, "You were really brave. You went deep into the hill, and we saw the Indigo Man, and we met the Sleer." Something happened then in her head, a rushing and tumbling, a whirl of darkness and crash of images. "I remember," said Scarlett. She said it to the empty darkness of her bedroom, and heard nothing in reply but the low trundle of distant roaring, making its way through the night. Bought his stores of food, the kind that lasted, cached in the crypt, and more in some of the chillier tombs and vaults and mausoleums. Silas had made sure of that. He had enough food to keep him going for a couple of months. Unless Silas or Miss Lupuscu was there, he simply would not leave the graveyard. He missed the world beyond the graveyard gates, but he knew it was not safe out there. Not yet. Graveyard, though, was his world and his domain, and he was proud of it and loved it, as only a 14-year-old boy can love anything. And yet, in the graveyard, no one ever changed. The little children Bot had played with when he was small were still little children. Fortinus, Fortinbras Bartleby, who had once been his best friend, was now 4 or 5 years younger than Bod was, and they had less to talk about each time they saw each other. Thackeray Porringer was Bod's height and age, and seemed to be in much better temper with him. He would walk with Bod in the evenings and tell stories of unfortunate things that had happened to his friends. Normally, stories would end in the friends being hanged until they were dead for no offense of theirs and by mistake, although sometimes they were simply transported to the American colonies, and they didn't have to be hanged unless they came back. Liza Hempstock, who had been Bod's friend for the last 6 years, was different in another way. She was less likely to be there for him when Bod went down to the nettle patch to see her, and on rare occasions when she would be short-tempered, argumentative, and often downright rude. Bod talked to Mr. Owens about this, and after a few moments' reflection, his father said, "It's just women, I reckon. She liked you as a boy, probably isn't sure who you are now you're a young man. I used to play with one little girl down by the duck pond every day until she turned about your age. Then she threw an apple at my head and did not say another word to me until I was 17. Mrs. Owens sniffed. "It was a pear I threw," she said tartly, "and I was talking to you again soon enough, for we danced the measure at your cousin Ned's wedding, and that was but 2 days after your 16th birthday." Mr. Owens said, "Of course you are right, my dear." He winked at Bob to tell him that none of it was serious, and then he mouthed 17 to show that really it was. Pod had allowed himself no friends among the living. That way, he had realized back during his short-lived school days, lay only trouble. Still, he had remembered Scarlet and had missed her for years after she went away, had long ago faced the fact that he would never see her again. And now she had been here, in his graveyard, and he had not known her. He was wondering deeper into the tangle of ivy and trees that made the graveyard's northwest quadrant so dangerous. Signs advised visitors to keep out. The signs were not needed. It was uninviting and creepy once you were past the ivy tangle that marked the end of the Egyptian walk, and the black doors in the mock Egyptian walls that led to people's final resting places in the northwest. In the northwest, nature had been reclaiming the graveyard for almost 100 years, and the stones were tipped over. Graves were forgotten or simply lost beneath green ivy. In the leaf fall of 50 years, paths were lost and impassable. Bod walked with care. He knew the area well, and he knew how dangerous it could be. When Bod was 9, he had been exploring in just this part of the world, and the soil had given way beneath him, tumbling him into a hole almost 20 feet down. The grave had been dug deep to accommodate many coffins, but there was no headstone and only one coffin, down at the bottom, containing a rather excitable medical gentleman named Carstairs, who seemed thrilled by Bod's arrival and insisted on examining Bod's wrist, which Bod had twisted in the tumble, grabbing onto a root. Before he could be persuaded to go and fetch help, Bod was making his way through the northwest quadrant, a sludge of fallen leaves, a tangle of ivy where the foxes had made their home, and fallen angels stared up blindly, because he had the urge to talk to the poet. Nehemiah Trott was the poet's name, and his gravestone beneath the greenery read, "Here lies the mortal remains of Nehemiah Trott, poet, 1741 to 1774. Swans sing before they die." Bod said, "Master Trott, may I ask you for advice?" Nehemiah Trott beamed wanly. "Of course, brave boy. The advice of poets is the cordiality of kings. How may I swear unction on your, no, not unction, how may I give balm to your pain?" "I'm not actually in pain. Well, there's a girl I used to know, and I wasn't sure if I should find her and talk to her, or if I should just forget about it." Nehemiah Trott drew himself up to his full height, which was less than Bod's, raised doff hands to his chest excitedly, and said, "Oh, you must go to her and implore her. You must call her your terpsichore, your echo, your Clytemnestra. You must write poems for her, mighty odes. You shall help I shall help you write them, and thus, and only thus, shall you win your true love's heart." "I don't actually need to win her heart. She's not my true love," said Bod, "just someone I'd like to talk to." "Of all the organs," said Nehemiah Trott, "the tongue is the most remarkable, for we use it both to taste our sweet wine and bitter poison. Thus also do we utter words both sweet and sour with the same tongue. Go to her, talk to her. I shouldn't. You should, sir. You must. I shall write about it when the battle's lost and won. But if I unfade for one person, it makes it easier for other people to see me." Nehemiah Trott said, "Ah, listen to me, young Leander, young hero, young Alexander. If you dare nothing, then when the day is over, nothing is all you will have gained." Good point. Bod was pleased with himself and glad he had sought the advice of the poet. Really, he thought, if you couldn't trust a poet to offer sensible advice, who could you trust? Which reminded him, "Master Trott," said Bod, "tell me about revenge." "Dish best served cold," said Nehemiah Trott. "Do not take revenge in the heat of the moment. Instead, wait until the hour is propitious. There was a Grub Street hack named O'Leary, an Irishman, I should add, who had the nerve, the confounded cheek, to write of my first slim volume of poems, a nosegay of beauty assembled for gentlemen of quality, that it was inferior doggerel of no worth whatsoever, and that the paper it was written on would have been better used as, no, I cannot say. Let us simply agree that it was the most vulgar statement." "But you got your revenge on him?" asked Bod, curious. I'm going to have to stop there. My son has begun to cry. Thanks for tuning in. You guys take care of yourselves. Happy last day of school eve. Take care of yourselves and your family, and keep reading.